Hello, I'm Jenny Stewart, Vice President of Consulting at Construct Software, and today I wanted to share a few of the basics of Kanban with you. Kanban's roots are really in lean manufacturing, the Toyota production system, and just-in-time inventory. Many people will consider Kanban to be an alternative path to agility, but those roots really do come from a separate place, and there's a little bit of a different philosophical way of thinking about the world when you are implementing Kanban with that lean perspective in mind. One of the big things that we want to bring to mind is the idea that lean is really a method that maximizes customer value. How do we best, most quickly get what our customers need from that idea or that ask or that concept all the way into their hands so that they can really obtain the value that they're seeking to have from what we're delivering them? And there's a couple big things that we need to do in order to do that. First is we want to continuously seek to improve our practices and our processes. We want to be ruthless about how can we get better, how can we learn, how can we be ever optimizing. Think about this a little bit like Scrum's retrospective process, but a little bit amped up. Instead of doing it on a continuous heartbeat like every 2 weeks, we really want to be thinking about this all the time. If we're looking at our practices, we're looking at our Kanban board, we're looking at our workflow, we look how we operate together. If we think there's an opportunity for making an improvement, we want to do that right away. We don't want to wait. We want to constantly be thinking about how do we continuously optimize, again, to better improve our ability to deliver what our customers want into their hands in a timely and quality manner. We also want to think about eliminating waste, again, towards that continuous improvement, but also just how do we streamline things? How do we make things the quickest and easiest we can to deliver them? In software, there's a few types of waste. One that immediately leaps into a lot of minds are defects. So we've delivered something and then we need to go redo it because we didn't deliver it right in the first place. So that's a type of waste that we want to look at. Some of the other wastes that are talked about in the lean community are extra features, extra processes, waiting, partially done work, or inventory sitting on the shelf. What does Kanban actually mean? It means a visual signboard, some way of giving us information, showing us where things are today. And a Kanban system is using that visual card or board as a system for controlling flow through the process. For example, here you might go to some sort of festival and only a certain number of people are allowed into it. There's maybe a token or a piece of plastic that you're given that says, yes, you're allowed in. If all of those are in use, our festival is full. No one is allowed into the festival until someone comes out handing back that plastic chip. That chip itself is a token for controlling flow through our process. What Kanban isn't. So I see this quite a bit that people think that Kanban is a specific process or workflow or software development cycle or a specific approach. This is what Kanban should look like. It really isn't that. One of Kanban's great strengths is that it is quite flexible and you can really Kanban anything. So we're not saying it must work in this particular way to be Kanban. Really, Kanban instead will go through the steps and stages of understanding our work, understanding our workflow, defining what stage exit criteria exists for us, establishing what our policies are. All of that can be applied to anything. So you can really Kanban anything. It isn't one specific way of working. And it certainly isn't just a simple little to-do, doing, and done. Unless you're doing something like personal Kanban, you have a little list of backlog for working in your yard, working on your projects, working on your hobby. Have at the to-do, doing, and done. But if you come to me as a team, building software, doing infrastructure, doing any of that kind of work, and you show me a board saying to do, doing, and done, I will say that is not Kanban because I don't understand your work. work. I don't understand your workflow. It needs to be more specific to the actual activities and steps and stages that our work goes through. Do you start by some form of analysis or investigation or understanding the work? And then what happens to the work? Do you build it or develop it or implement it? Those are the kind of things that I'm looking for on a Kanban board. And by the way, Kanban isn't just a Kanban board. Kanban board is a great place to start, but you can really think of that as the first step into Kanban. There is much, much more to Kanban beyond that. So let's talk a little bit about what those Kanban core practices are beyond just the board. You have the board. The next thing that we want to do is we want to optimize how the work flows across that board. How do we, as quickly as possible and reasonable, move things from our backlog to done? And here we want to establish what are called WIP limits, work in process limits that help us optimize our flow across the board. So in the analysis step, we have some amount of work that's in process and we may have some amount of work that's done. And the limit on this board says we don't want anything more than 3 items in process and done to optimize our ability to develop, test, document, and deploy our work. If we put more stuff in analysis, it actually bogs our system down and makes it slower for things to move through our system. WIP is a big one when I work with teams that we need to talk about and figure out a good starting point, and then they'll use that incremental ongoing process improvement to fine-tune that to optimize. The next thing that we need to talk about are stage exit criteria. What's it mean to be done in each of these steps? How do we know we're done in analysis before we move on to development? Once we have all of that in place, we have kind of the basic system in place. And now we want to optimize that system. So we want to look at some of the data about our systems, the metrics of our systems. Here, many people will look at things like cumulative flow diagrams and average cycle time or cycle time distribution to help us understand how work flows through our system and improve that. Really here, we're managing the flow. Once that flow management in place, now we're starting to talk about, I have the system's running, I understand the system. Now we want to make sure that we're continuously improving that system. So we need to implement some form of feedback mechanism. Sometimes as a starting point, I'll have teams steal the retrospective idea from Scrum. Sometimes we'll start with the idea of an experiment. We have to always be running an experiment, and really mature teams will just constantly be thinking about how did this work and what can we do next, and having those spontaneous conversations day in and day out, or every few days, or on a very regular basis to make sure that we're constantly seeking to improve how we are going about doing our work. And then the last thing that we want to do is really to improve collaboratively and experimentally. We want to make sure that we're using that data that we were looking at, feedback data from something like how's it working? What could we do better? What are we going to change? As well as the actual specific measures and metrics that we might have, like cycle time distribution. We want to get to a place, and this is really where Kanban is a deep, rich Kanban, where we're improving and evolving experimentally. We're able to say something like, we believe if we make this change, for example, if we say we're going to reduce our WIP limits in the analysis phase from 5 to 4, we think that will improve our cycle time. It will reduce by at least 2 days. And we need to run this experiment for a month before we know that that's working the way that we expect it. Now we have really concrete experimentation that we're running across our system. That's when you know you've reached kind of the rich, deep depth of what Kanban can be.